We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for?
Those masters of the universe are at it again.
They're not sending their best.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And this week we're going to be talking about something I like to refer to as the next frontier in illegal immigration, and that is people entering on visas. This isn't specifically about the issue of visa overstays, which is the way it's ordinarily thought of. In other words, not people jumping the border, but people coming in legally and then not leaving. But it's really broader than that, and that is the whole visa system has real problems. And there was a hearing recently entitled Restoring Integrity and Security to the Visa Process. And our own Jessica Vaughan, Director of Policy Studies here at the Center, was a witness. And you can see her 5-minute opening statement, which is all you're allowed in a hearing. And then she had a longer written statement. Both of those are on the website, and we will have a link to them in the show notes. But there's a lot more than she was able to talk about in 5 minutes, which is what is that, 300 seconds or something? So we're going to give her more than that. So Jessica, thanks for doing this. And what is the issue with our visa process? In other words, as Sonny Bono, when he was a congressman, as in Sonny and Cher from a long time ago, he was a congressman from Palm Springs, and he used to say, what part of illegal don't you understand? And the point there was that illegal immigration, he was specifically thinking about border jumping, is bad because it's illegal. Well, this is all legal, isn't it? What's the problem with people coming in on these legal visa programs?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, it is a vast topic, but it is an important one. The reason, or at least the jumping off point for the House Immigration Subcommittee,
which is who you were testifying before.
Yes, they were hosting the hearing. And what prompted them to hold the hearing was this incident in Boulder, Colorado, where there was a firebomb attack on a group of pro-Israel demonstrators. And the guy who did it was from Egypt, and he and his family had moved here on a tourist visa and then proceeded to apply for asylum. But the problem here is not so much that they overstayed, but they should have never gotten a visa to begin with.
Right.
It was a mistake to issue them this visa. They were Egyptian, but they were living in Kuwait. And that right there should be a red flag for a lot of visa issuances when people are applying from another country. It's pretty hard for them to show that, they're likely to return to their home country because they've already left that country.
Right.
I mean, it was visa fraud, really. They lied to the visa officer and to the officer at the port of entry because they applied for tourist visas. And clearly, based on statements that the family members made, they had, from the get-go, intended to move to the United States on this tourist visa.
Right.
And this happens over and over again. I gave some other examples in my testimony about a guy who got a student visa. He was from Iran, arrested for domestic violence. It took like 9 years for ICE to finally arrest the guy. And, there's the case of the guy also from Egypt who was living in Falls Church and going to George Mason University, who was planning a mass casualty attack in New York City. So it's, yes, there are a lot of security risks among this population, but the problem is also that many people just abuse the system.
Right.
And the biggest problem, I think, is that we set up our categories so leniently that we make it easy for people to abuse the system. Sometimes you don't even have to commit fraud. you're just, you just shouldn't get the visa. It's a mistake. We shouldn't have the category, or we shouldn't be giving out so many of these visas.
Right, exactly. So what are some of the things we can do? I mean, you sort of alluded to it, but what are some of the things short of just getting rid of some of these categories, which frankly, I'm all for, but that is the kind of thing in most cases Congress would have to act on. What are some of the things that can be done administratively to, as the title of the hearing said, restore integrity to the visa process?
Well, the Trump administration is doing a better job of vetting, as far as I can see, by looking into social media accounts of applicants and simply barring certain countries, applicants from certain countries, from participating in some of these visa programs, either because of the overstay rates or because, their countries won't share information, so we don't know who they are. But generally, we need to be a little more stingy about issuing these visas. Under the Biden administration, issuances of all temporary visas went up 25%.
Mm-hmm.
With 11 million new visa issuances in 2024 alone. And that's not even counting border crossing cards or people who are coming in under the visa waiver program. So we've got way too many people getting permission to come into the country to begin with. And that's just, we can't expect ICE to keep up with all of the overstays or the fraud or any of that with just that huge volume. And there is one thing in the spending bill that recently passed Congress that's going to help address that, I think, and that is a raising of the visa fees in some categories. And that's going to make it harder for more people to be able to submit an application. It's also going to generate revenue for more officers to do these adjudications to try to do a better job. And another big part of it, though, is the culture of customer service and get to yes and travel facilitation that has dominated, especially the State Department, but also to a certain extent USCIS that adjudicates a lot of the immigrant visas.
Mm-hmm.
They have just seen themselves as managers of paper, not necessarily as, trying to control the issuance of visas. And this is particularly true of the State Department, where, the culture there has been for a long time, it's our job to get these people their visas so that they can come to the United States without, asking too many questions that would make us uncomfortable or, make people not like us. So, they just have to get these numbers down.
Right.
Another thing that we talked about a lot at the hearing was the need for mandatory interviews. And I said that I thought that we needed, the U.S. government needed to talk to every single person pretty much with very few exceptions before issuing a visa for the first time for anyone.
Right.
And especially for the permanent categories. You'd be surprised
Really?
how few green card applicants actually are interviewed.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an opportunity for their credibility to be assessed, and it just needs to happen. And again, these fees are going to help them hire more people to do better screening for all of these categories.
Let me just underline, you're talking about not just screening out terrorists, for instance. That's kind of the go-to concern for a lot of people and politicians. It's also just screening out liars, like this Egyptian terrorist in Boulder. Even if he hadn't thrown firebombs at old ladies, he still should never have gotten his visa. In other words, even if he weren't a security threat, he should never have been allowed to get a tourist visa in the first place.
That is exactly right. And a really good point, that we don't have a machine that can allow us to read the minds
Right.
or look into the future to see what somebody's going to do if they're allowed into the country. And, so we're never going to be able to screen out all the terrorists. Some of these terror groups deliberately recruit people who have a clean record. This is true of these South American theft groups that are causing such a problem in a lot of parts of the country. They come in on either visa waivers from Chile or tourist visas, and they're recruited specifically because they don't have a police record. And they come and they form, they're formed into a gang and they commit burglaries around the country. That should be addressed, by simply not issuing visas to young people who have no demonstrable ties to their home country. They simply shouldn't have gotten the visa. And it also, when we have routine, robust immigration enforcement and strict adjudications of visas, which includes vetting, and if we do that across the board, we are going to stop terrorists too.
Right.
And it's just going to generally bring the system under some control. And one of the great side effects of that is that the terrorists won't be able to get in either. So, we have to approach it that way. We cannot do what, became popular under the Bush administration, which was this idea that you could find the terrorist and everybody else is okay.
Right.
It simply doesn't work.
That's the perspective a lot of people have with regard to border enforcement too, which is not what this is, but that somehow we can tell who the good illegal border crosser is and keep out the bad illegal border crosser. And if we knew that, I'd be investing in the stock market, not doing this for a living. So the point is you've got to have consistent across the board security in order for there to be security at all.
Right.
Some of the other things in your one of the things that interests me in your written statement, I don't think you talked about this in your oral remarks, so maybe you did, was the duration of stay issue. So these are people, they've already got their visas, and they come in, let's say they're going to Disneyland. They get a B1, B2 tourist visa, and they say, we're going to Disneyland, and then we're going to go to whatever, Magic Mountain, and we're going to be in the U.S. for 2 weeks. Nowadays, don't they just automatically have the tradition customarily just been given 6-month duration of stay, even though they have no intention supposedly of staying 6 months?
That's right. And this is an issue with Customs and Border Protection controls this. The officers at the port of entry, Office of Foreign Operations, the blue shirts is their nickname.
Right.
The ones that...
Office of Field Operations.
Right, who man the legal ports of entry routinely for people on short-term visitor visas, B1, B2, for either business or pleasure, will give a stay of 6 months. And I can't tell you how many times as a consular officer, I would have someone come to my window asking for a renewal of their visa, and I would look at their passport and I would see that they had stayed like 5 months and 29 days. And here they were asking me for permission to go back again. And I said, why did you stay so long? And invariably they would say, well, I hadn't planned to stay that long, but they gave me 6 months.
Yep. Yeah.
Like as if, that meant, they should take advantage of that. I have seen studies, not lately, but they've been done by the Department of Homeland Security, and I hope they will do them again, that looked at the average length of time that people on short-term visitor visas actually stay.
Right.
And they found something like 70% stay less than 30 days. And so the question is, why are we giving anyone more than that to start off with?
Right. In other words, those are people who legitimately were just coming for a conference or a convention or, a vacation to visit the Statue of Liberty or something, and then went home. And yet we gave them 6 months just automatically by default, basically. And now that is something that the administration could change on its own. There's no statutory issue there, is there?
Not that I'm aware of. It should just be, a routine directive to issue a 30-day stay unless they either apply for it in advance when they're, in the embassy or consulate and say that they need more time. And then the consular officer can question them more closely about why. And that information can be put into the record that the port of entry officer will see. Or they could make that determination because a lot of people have 10-year visas, for multiple entries over that time. So if they come one time, and let's say it's, a grandmother coming to watch the kids for 3 months or visiting, their family for a lengthy period of time, fine. But, you don't get that automatically. You get to establish that you are probably going to comply with the visa if we give it to you. And you can do that in secondary inspection at the port of entry, and make people affirmatively seek that longer period of stay rather than just giving it to everybody. It was considered originally, I think, a workload issue, like, oh, let's just give these people 6 months and they'll be fine.
Right.
That clearly doesn't work, and that can be addressed. And a number of these things can be addressed administratively by the executive branch. But some of these issues of defining who is eligible and, the question of should we even have this visa category, those are questions for Congress, though.
Mm-hmm.
And Congress really needs to take a look at them because, we can do a better job of adjudicating and reviewing and so on. And we can devote more resources to fraud, and that will help a lot. But eventually we're going to come to this question of why do we even have this category?
Right. I mean, if it's inherently flawed, there's only so much lipstick you can put on the pig, in a sense,
Right. And I think there are several of them that we talked about at the hearing and some we didn't talk about that are worth thinking about. And, the first one on everybody's list always is the visa lottery.
Right.
You and I have both covered this for many years. It's a pointless category to have that should be gotten rid of.
And this is a green card program, just to be clear. It's not one of the temporary visas.
Right.
One of the other sort of category of temporary visas that, again, Congress has authorized, but it could at least be managed more tightly is the crime victim visas. There's the U visas and the T visas. And what are those and what are some of the problems with them? Because it's the kind of thing that probably seemed harmless at the time, but it's not turning out to be that way.
That's right. Congress thought that 10,000 of these visas for illegal aliens who've been victims of serious crimes and are needed to testify, 10,000 a year should be enough. But we're getting so many applications now, well over 50,000, that there's a backlog of over 300,000 people who are waiting for these U visas for crime victims or who claim to be victims of a crime. And the program is out of control. The one problem is that the Biden administration set up a process so that you could get a work permit and protection from deportation just for applying for the visa before there was any meaningful review of whether or not you qualified for it.
Unbelievable.
The other problem is that the government relies extensively on a certification from a local law enforcement agency, and many of them are pressured to sign off on them, often by state legislation that implies that they are supposed to just sign off and send it in. There's a lot of fraud in the program. The one big problem is that we found that people are staging crimes.
Right. That's been in the news a number of times where there's like a fake robbery. And in fact, I think in Texas, maybe earlier this year, there was, a staged robbery at a gas station. But then this is Texas, so everybody has guns. And so some other customer there saw this guy pull out a gun and shot him. And so, he deserved it. It's not like we should be lamenting this, but this is dangerous, and the system clearly incentivizes it.
Yeah, and it's sapping the resources of local law enforcement. One of the biggest problems that was identified in a government report that was never released to the public, but I happened to be able to get a copy of it to review, is that more than 60% of the crimes that people are getting U visas for as victims, have already been closed. And so there's not going to be any prosecution. It's not going to be solved. We don't need the illegal alien here for a trial or investigation or any reason whatsoever. The crime happened a long time ago. It wasn't a serious crime and nothing's going to be done about it. And so, why are we giving people a visa for that? It's become like an amnesty for illegal aliens who can get a police agency to sign off on it and wait through the waiting list. There's other ways to deal with crime victims if we want them to be here for trial, but we shouldn't be doing it at all if there's no case.
Right. And again, to emphasize, even though only 10,000 people with U visas, even though there's technically only 10,000 people who get the U visas, the Biden administration basically gave work permits, which is what really matters to people, and Social Security numbers and protection from deportation to people just who applied.
And to their families.
Yeah, and to their families. Okay, well, exactly. So, again, that's something that can be dealt with administratively, right?
Yes, most definitely. They can stop giving out the benefits, make people wait for a meaningful review. And, I think there's a lot they can do with writing guidance on how the law should be interpreted. I think they could do some training for local law enforcement agencies saying, look, don't just sign off on these things because you're going to, become a party to a fraud on the government.
Right, right.
Do background checks on people who are applying, recognize their motivations in applying for this, that it's an amnesty. And local law enforcement agencies will not be upset with that because according to this report that I mentioned before, most of them do not feel that it helps them solve crimes or improve their relationships with immigrant communities or any of that.
So another one of the problematic visa programs is the Special Immigrant Juvenile Program. If you could explain what that is briefly and why is this a problem?
Yeah, I believe that this is another program that it needs to be maybe not eliminated entirely, but severely cut back. This is another one of these well-meaning visas that we give. It's supposed to be for aliens who arrived as minors and who can show that they were abused, neglected, or abandoned by one of their parents, and they can get a state family court or other appropriate judge to approve their petition that makes them essentially a ward of the state that they live in.
Right.
And this is another one where there's I think a big problem is that it's a state official who is essentially establishing their eligibility for this green card.
Huh, yeah.
But also the definition is too lenient. It allows young people to get this visa, even if they have one parent who is their custodial parent and has not abused them, because the way the statute is written is that they just need to show that they were abused, neglected, or abandoned by one parent.
So if dad abandons his wife and kid, basically this program lets the kid illegally come to the United States and get a green card.
Right, even if they come live with dad.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I'm not making that up. There are cases like that.
Incredible.
And these are not even always kids. They just have to apply by the time they're 21. So a lot of them are actually adults. And that's a problem too. Some states have changed the age of majority just to allow illegal aliens who are 19, 20, and almost 21 to apply for these visas. And the standards of evidence and verification, authentication that they apply in these courts are, leave a lot to be desired. If it were an American citizen kid, like asking for a restraining order or something against one of their parents who abused them, there would be a lot more verification of what is actually happening and evidence. These judges will sign off on the basis of affidavits and other really flimsy indications of what really was happening here. Apparently, it's known among some communities that, you can come in on a student visa and then get this SIJ before you graduate just by saying, well, my parents didn't continue paying my tuition, so I'm abused, neglected, and abandoned. And they've gotten them. These are real cases.
Right. Incredible. Yeah,
and there's a lot that can be done on this too. First of all, Congress could fix the one parent issue. But they could also say, I think there may be cases that are legitimate if it's young kids who may be victims of trafficking or something who are truly without custodial parents and in the care of a state child welfare agency. And there was some legislation in Florida where this has been a real scam that tried to correct it, that Congress could adopt federally and basically say that you're only going to qualify for this special immigrant juvenile visa if you're already in the care of a state child welfare agency and that agency endorses or certifies, not allowing people to come in with outside lawyers who game the system. I've found if you look on YouTube, you can find video after video of immigration lawyers advertising this green card to young illegal aliens.
Unbelievable.
So it's out of control also. And we need to, if not do away with it, then just really narrow down who can qualify for it. And again, some of these programs are, we're talking tens of thousands of applicants every year. They're bigger than some other green card programs and just increasing immigration to the United States. They are numerically limited, but again, they can get these benefits before they actually have to, be examined by an adjudicator. And
even if they're turned down, then what? It's another person that ICE has to find and remove from the country. It's it's absurd. Are there any other programs that especially kind of stand out as screaming for reform, either administrative reform or statutory reform?
Well, of course, the OPT program, the optional practical training that we've talked about before, that was not specifically a topic of the hearing, but that's the program that allows foreign students who have finished their degree program or are in the midst of a degree program to work in the United States, and their employer doesn't have to pay payroll taxes. And if they're in a so-called STEM field, they can stay for up to 3 years. That one needs to go. The executive branch has to do that because it was never even enacted by Congress.
Right.
I learned something when I was doing research for this hearing. I am not a big fan of the J visa programs, which are the so-called exchange visitors. Most of them are work programs, au pairs, camp counselors, summer work travel, postdocs, all kinds of categories that they've created to allow people to work temporarily in the country under the guise of a cultural exchange program.
Right.
I found in the regulations that the Department of State may, and I'm reading from the regulation, in its sole discretion, determine that a class of designated programs either compromises our national security or no longer furthers the public diplomacy mission of the Department of State. And they can just cancel these programs. And those are letting in hundreds of thousands of people a year on legal visas that have high rates of overstay. They can just axe the program.
And even if they're not overstay, for instance, we published a long report by our retired colleague, now retired colleague Jerry Kammer, who wrote about the summer work travel program, which is one of those under the umbrella of the J visa. And even if people go back, what it does is essentially makes it impossible for American young people to get jobs, summer jobs, because what happens is people from Ukraine or Romania or wherever it is, Ecuador, are through brokers arranged to get jobs like summer jobs in December or January, and then American kids start looking for work, in Atlantic City, Maryland, for instance, and during spring break for the summer.
That's in New Jersey.
Already...
Ocean City, Maryland.
Ocean City, excuse me. What did I say? Atlantic City?
Yes.
Yeah, Ocean City. Sorry. Maybe the same in Atlantic City. I don't know. But
as somebody who had those summer jobs in Ocean City when I was in college, it's definitely.
Yeah, but the point is, it becomes the jobs are already taken.
That's
because of this visa program. It's interesting that I didn't know that state could just get rid of these programs. Now, some of them are, if you have an exchange, if you have a professor who's going to be teaching for a semester at a university, that's also under the J visa program, and that's harmless enough. But it's kind of, it's sort of metastasized like sort of mushrooms. You've had these work, ostensible cultural exchange programs that are really just fake work visas.
They're cheap labor programs.
Right, exactly. Cheap labor programs.
And they displace Americans. Like you said, teenage unemployment rates are now in the double digits. They should, the jobs are there, but the kids don't always have the opportunity to get
Even worse, again, it's not, and this is a point we make with regard to adults in the labor market, the teenage unemployment rates are rates of people who are looking for jobs and not getting them. One of the things that the J visa contributes to, and there's a lot of other, mass illegal immigration as well, is that lots of, teenagers, college students aren't even looking for work. In other words, they don't even enter the job market, which has long-term harmful implications, as we've written elsewhere. So any other we're getting at the end of the time now, is there anything else that kind of jumps out as just screaming for reform?
Well, there are a number of other programs. We talked a bit about marriage fraud at the hearing, and that
Right.
I think is screaming for attention. There was an attorney who appeared who represents American citizen victims of marriage fraud scams and gave the
Right.
committee a lot of good information about what to do about it. And, some lesser known programs like the investor visas, that become permanent. They're supposed to be temporary, but they become permanent. We've heard that before on a lot of visa programs. But
Right.
again, in general, it's a combination of improving the screening and vetting and rethinking how these programs work and whether we should even have them. And that's the work that we have to hope Congress is going to be able to take up now that they've gotten this spending bill out of the way. And again, we've achieved great progress with the boost in enforcement, and that helps a lot. But at a certain point, we can't expect ICE to keep up with all of the millions of people who shouldn't have been let in here to begin with.
Right. Okay, on that note, thank you, Jessica, for coming in and talking about this. It's Jessica Vaughan, been talking about the issue of integrity or lack thereof in our visa system, which was the topic of a recent House Immigration Subcommittee hearing that Jessica testified at. And we'll have links to some of these things in the show notes. And I'm sure we're going to have you back in the future, Jessica, if only because, as I said at the beginning, with illegal border crossing significantly under control, I mean, it's never going to end, but it's not the mass phenomenon it was in the past. The integrity of our visa process actually takes on even more importance than it did before.
Thanks. Happy to talk about it. And I hope we'll be continuing to talk about it as time goes on.
And finally, I hope everybody had a good 4th of July weekend. The president signed the big, beautiful bill, the big reconciliation bill, over the weekend. I think he signed it on the 4th of July on the White House lawn before the fireworks. And there's a lot to the bill, of course, as tax measures, all kinds of things. But there's a whole bunch of immigration-related spending and tax and spending-related issues in there. We have up on our site a kind of quick overview of the immigration provisions in there. One of them, interestingly, one of the smaller ones, I guess, because the bigger ones are extra money, huge amounts of extra money for ICE to detain illegal immigrants until they can deport them, extra agents for ICE, Border Patrol, wall funding, a lot of things like that. But one of the smaller ones was a remittance tax, a tax on remittances, the money that illegal immigrants send home, which is one of the main reasons lots of illegal immigrants come here, is to earn money to send home. And this issue of taxing remittances is something that our late colleague David North wrote about a lot. Oklahoma was the only state, is still the only state as far as I know, that has a remittance tax. And the federal measure, I think, is modeled on Oklahoma's. And we have a post up by Jason Richwine, one of our colleagues, who briefly looked at the issue of welfare receipt. In other words, immigrants in the U.S. getting public taxpayer-supported welfare, who then send remittances home. The data is very limited on this, so it's not an in-depth look at it. But his point in the post, and we'll link to it, is that a remittance tax can potentially or will potentially recoup at least some part of the welfare that U.S. taxpayers are giving to immigrants, legal or illegal, that they are then sending home, which is not the point of welfare. In other words, if you have money to send home, you shouldn't be getting any welfare at all. It's an interesting issue. Jason's post on it is just a sort of initial brief look because the data is very limited, but it's a very interesting issue. And like I said, there's a longer overview that we've posted that has all the various immigration elements in the big, beautiful bill, in the section of the bill that's contained in. It's a useful overview of the immigration impact of this very large bill. So that's it for this week's episode of Parsing Immigration Policy. This is Mark Krikorian, hoping that you will tune in next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our producer, Brian Griffith, for making this all happen. Thanks, of course, for Jessica for talking about the visa issue for us. And I hope you tune in next week.